So welcome everyone to today's session. So today we're going to talk about navigating IRB review and the approval process. My name is Harry Sun, and I am a fellow at the CAFE Center, which is the Center for Academic and Faculty Excellence. And during the semester, we hold frequent webinars on various different topics. So be sure to check out our CGU CAFE website and for any upcoming webinars. And today we're gonna just use this session to kind of talk about things about IRB, and hopefully by the end of the session, you'll be able to learn something useful. So for a quick overview of today's content, and this is also what I hope that you'll be able to gain at the end of the session. So I hope that by the end of the session, you'll be able to understand the purpose and the structure of IRB review, and also to identify common submission pitfalls, learn strategies for faster approvals, as well as to gain some confidence in preparing your own IRB submission. Right now, I'm going to post a link in the chat. And also, you can also scan the QR code. So just in case that if any question come up during the webinar, please go to the link provided in the chat or scan the QR code on the screen and to post any questions. So you can post anonymously on there. And what I'll do is that at the end of the session, at the end of the PowerPoint slide, there'll be a place where I can see everybody's question and answer questions systematically there. So I'll give everyone a few moments to take out their phone and scan the QR code. If you miss the QR code, the link is also provided in the chat. Welcome, Adam. We're just giving folks some moments to scan the QR code, and also you can use the link in the chat to post any questions that may come up during the webinar. Okay, so I kind of want to start this webinar by just going through some of the overview of some of the basics of IRB. So I want to start it with the three ethical principles of IRB. So the Bellman report established three ethical principles and guidelines for the protection of human subject research. And these are respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. So I want to kind of go into a little more details on each one of the principles. And since they're critical for understanding what IRB is, and why it exists. So respect for persons, starting with respect for persons, it means really giving autonomy to people, to your participants, so that every participant is a person at first. They're not just a data point. So they should be able to have the right to decide freely whether they want to participate in a study, and also to understand what they're agreeing to when they sign the consent form. And respect for persons always starts with autonomy, treating participants as capable of making informed decisions. What IRB will check is that whether your consent process is clear, honest, and also free from pressure for a participant to participate. And for a true informed consent, is not just a signature on the consent form, but it means that the participant truly understand what taking part in the study will involve. They must know the purpose of the study, the procedures, the anticipated risk, and associated benefits, as well as their right to withdraw at any point during the study. There should be no hidden strings and no pressure, no added pressure for them to take part in the study. So that is what it means, the principle of respect for persons. The second principle is the beneficence principle. It means maximizing good and minimizing harm. So the key word here is maximizing and minimizing. So if you think about, if you imagine that good and harm are on the two sides of the scale, then the good should always be the heavier one. You should always outweigh the harm. Researchers are ethically obliged to maximize potential benefits and minimize potential harms. And these harms could be psychological, social, or physical. Beneficence means designing your study so that it's worth doing, that the knowledge gained outweighs the risk to participants. And sometimes people think about it as the do no harm principle, but that's actually not 100% accurate. It's more about do more good or do good more wisely. So what the IRB will do is that they will look for evidence that you've anticipated risk, like emotional distress, embarrassment, or privacy concerns, and you have anticipated those risks and planned for procedures to deal with those risks. Another thing I heard people often assume about this is that as long as my research doesn't involve any physical harm or physical risk, I'm okay. But that's not always true, because often the time we find out that participating in research can cause the harm could often be psychological, such as causing distress, causing stigma on participant. Or the harm could also be social, such as loss of personal privacy. So what's a key point here is that there could be all kinds of potential harms and risk, as well as potential benefits, so that when you're thinking about your own research, you should always consider all of them. So that is the principle of beneficence. And the last principle is the principle of justice. It means fairness. So it means distributing the risk and the rewards of research fairly. You're not exploiting some groups while others groups benefit. And this historically, this has been an issue because marginalized groups were used as the easy subject. They're easy to recruit, so they're often used as the study subject. But sometimes that the research they participate in that are not really beneficial to them. So justice really requires us to ask the question that who are you studying and why are you studying them? Is there a good reason that these people are recruited for your research? So what the IRB will look for is fairness in recruitment. Participants should be chosen for scientific reasons, not just for convenience or vulnerability. So if you imagine that your study could benefit a certain community member, then it means that every member of that community should have equal chance to participate. And also, if your study involves a certain community, then you should make sure that every member of that community should benefit from the result of your own study. So I understand a lot of these principles are very theoretical, and I want to just give a few moments for people to reflect. So here's a question. Which principle do you think is the trickiest to uphold in your own area of research, and why? So take a moment to reflect. It could be just on your own, or if you like, you can type in the chat as well. But we'll take 2 to 3 minutes here. maybe 10 more seconds. As you're reflecting, I hope that you'll be able to think about more deeply about each one of the three principles, although they can sometimes feel like pretty straightforward, but when you're conducting your research, it's always good to keep in mind, like, is my research respecting for people? Am I evaluating the beneficence? And is my research fair for everyone and my participant? So next, I want to talk more about what IRB is and when IRB is required, since sometimes even these basic questions got misunderstood. So IRB is required when there is what we call human subject research, and there is a very strict definition on what is considered as human subject research, as defined by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Service Office. Human subject means a living individual about whom an investigator, whether professional or student, conducting research obtains one, data through intervention or interaction with the individual, or two, identifiable private information. And so that is human subject. Research means a systematic investigation, including research development, testing, and evaluation, designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. So the IRB will only review activities that meet the definition of human subject research, meaning that your work should involve living individuals and gather identifiable private information or data through direct interaction. And also, your research should also aim to contribute to generalizable knowledge for it to consider as a research. So what does the IRB look in context? So every institution have their own IRB, but they all follow the same federal rules or federal ethical standards. But in the interpretation of the standards may vary from institution to institution, from IRB office to another IRB office. So what one IRB may call exempt, another may want a brief review. So in this sense, IRB serves kind of like the translator between the federal ethics standards, as well as between ethical standards and the research conducted at any institution. So it's just to make sure that the research conducted at an institution is compliant with the federal standards. And so when IRB receives an application or a research application outline, they will often try to categorize the application into either one of the three levels. So on the first level, we have exempt research. Exempt research often involves no more than minimal risk. And here, minimal risk is the probability of and magnitude of harm or discomfort anticipated in the research are not greater in or themselves than those ordinarily encountered in daily life, or during the performance of routine physical and psychological examination or tests. Some of the classic examples of exempt research are those anonymous surveys or secondary data analysis. And the second, in addition to exempt, the second category is a review is expedited review. So these expedited review often happens when the research collects identifiable information or biological data, or the research involves sensitive questions or procedures. Some examples of expedited review includes if you're doing interviews or focus group interviews, or the research involves some kind of physiological measures, or if the research is collecting video or audio data from the participant. And then on top of it, expedited, there's also full board review. So full board review is happens when the research involves more than minimal risks. So more than what people will experience and risk people experience in their daily life. Full board review can also be required when the research participant involves vulnerable groups. So some examples of full board review, for example, research on trauma, mental health, or substance abuse, or if the research involves working with prisoners, minors, undocumented workers, cognitively impaired, or economically disadvantaged people, or pregnant people, since these people are considered members of a vulnerable group. So when research involving this population, it will likely require a full board review. So as a rule of thumb, if participants might feel emotional or social pressure, is likely to be expedited or full board review. And also, I often hear that some people think that being exempt means that they can escape, they can just skip IRB, but that's not the case. Being an exempt research just means that a simpler review process, but regardless of being exempt or not, it will still require an IRB review. So next, I want to also talk a little bit more about what IRB might look for when they receive an application. So this is for your own benefits. You can kind of think of this as a checklist before you're about to submit your application, or when you're reviewing your application, you can like go through each one of the elements here to see if you have those elements fulfilled. So the first element is clarity of methods. So when submitting IRB application, you always want to make sure that the method you're writing, the outlines you're writing are clear and easy to understand using concise language. You may want to avoid using jargons or complicated sentences that can make it confusing for the reviewers. So clarity of method is important. Also, the second element is sound consent process. So the IRB want to look for evidence that in your consent process, it covers every element that needs to be there. You want to make sure that in the consent form, you should use clear and concise language so that the participant, when they're reading and consenting into the study, they are not confused by some of the language in there. And the third principle is the risk. The third element is risk and benefits balance. So this is connected to the benefits principle we have talked about. The IRB, when reviewing your application, they want to see some evidence that you've fully anticipated the associated risk and the benefits in your own research, and how these two balance each other. And the fourth element is privacy and data management. This is especially important if you're collecting personal identifiable information, and they want to look for evidence that you've clearly thought about how to handle this private information and how you manage those private data. If your research involves vulnerable populations, the IRB will also look for treatment of those vulnerable populations. And so that is the last elements here. If you can show that you've anticipated those 5 elements in your application, then it will stand out more to the IRB office as being well prepared. And that may help with getting a faster approval. So until now, that is kind of the overview, a quick overview of the basics of IRB, and as well as different levels of reviews we have talked about. And my plan for the next 10 to 20 minutes is to go through some of the case studies. So these are scenarios that I have generated myself that I thought that they represent different area of research, different research method, and some of them might mimic some of the research you want to do on your own. So I thought it might be useful for us to kind of go through each one of them and to think about whether the described research here which level of review should it get? Should it be exempt, expedited, or requiring a full board review? And also, what is the reason that it requires each level of review? So I'm going to read out each one of the case, and feel free to unmute yourself to talk to say which level review it is, or you can also type in the chat as well to indicate whether it's exempt, expedited, or full board. So case study 1 here, we have an online survey. Researcher A conducts an anonymous online survey asking undergraduate students about their study habits, time management, and the use of coffee during finals. There is no identifying information collected. The topic isn't sensitive, and participation is voluntary with a clear consent statement at the beginning. And so which level review should this research receive? Any thoughts?
Could you put the options back up? I mean, do you have like just like a little table?
Oh yeah, of course.
Maybe expedite it?
Why?
Well, you are talking to students, right?
Undergrad student.
Mm-hmm.
So when the research is considered expedited, it often involves collecting personal identifiable information. But in this case, since it's
it's anonymous. It's anonymous. Oh, I didn't see that. Yeah. Okay. Then it would be the first one.
Yeah, that's right. So it'd be considered exempt because it doesn't involve any personal identifiable information, and also it doesn't involve more than minimal risk.
Right.
So here's a second case study. Is another online survey, but this time researcher B runs an online survey about coping strategies for workplace stress among employed adults. The survey collects age, gender, and occupation, but no names or emails. Some items ask about burnout symptoms and emotional exhaustion. Participation is confidential, but not anonymous. So which one do you think this research belong to? I'll go back to the tables again.
Is that one expedited?
Why?
You are collecting data, but it is anonymous. And I was concerned about it being workplace stress or emotional exhaustion, but since it's anonymous, well, it is confidential, but not anonymous. So maybe it's not. I'm going to stick with expedited.
Yeah, that's correct. If it's like the two categories we think about, one is collecting identifiable information, right? Even in this case, there's no names or emails, but sometimes just using age, gender, and occupation, this combination could easily identify someone. Especially if it's like a small company. So it's involving personal identifiable information, but also, like you said, is asking about coping strategies about workplace stress. So that may be considered as a sensitive information as well. So for those two reasons, I think you're right that this one should belong to the expedited review. Okay, moving on to our next case study 3 is another online survey. Researcher C designs an online survey for trauma survivors, asking about experiences of abuse and coping. Some questions might trigger distress. The research plans to collect emails for follow-up interviews. So which one review level should this research receive?
I think this would require a full board.
Yes, and why is that?
Because the email makes it identifiable, and also it is like talking about traumatic experiences. Yeah, so and that is significant.
Yeah, like you're right. It most likely is going to be a full board review for the reasons like you talked about, is collecting identifying information, and also the great point about asking traumatic experiences may trigger some distress, and that is that's involving more than minimal risk, right? More than the risk people experience in the daily life. And also in this case, trauma survivors can be considered as a vulnerable group of population as well. So for those 3 reasons, it is likely going to be a full board review. So our next case study is researcher D wants to survey high school students about their mental health and social media habits. The study asks about anxiety, depression, and online bullying. Parental consent is required. So what do you think this case applies to?
Can you put the chart back up again?
Of course.
Oops. I was going to say full board because of the sensitivity of they're minors,
Right.
and that would be my first reason.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's yeah, exactly. Because high school students, they're still considered minors, so therefore they belong to the vulnerable group. And so that is a very clear reason for why this will be considered as requiring a full board review. And also on top of that, the questions about anxiety, depression, and online bullying could also be considered as could potentially induce emotional distress on the students. And so that's more than minimal risk. So it is another reason that it will likely be requiring a full board review. So the next case study is an interview study. Researcher E interviews recent immigrants about their experiences with housing discrimination. Participants' names are replaced with pseudonyms, but recordings and transcripts are stored securely. And which level review do you think this one should receive?
I would say it would be a full board because the well, recent immigrants when it comes to housing, especially housing discrimination, yeah, and it may trigger traumatic experiences, yeah. So and then so I think it would be more than minimal risk.
That's great. Yeah,
I agree with that one too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I honestly didn't consider that, but think that's a great point. For that reason, like exactly what you mentioned, it might be considered a full board. Well, my original point here was it could also be considered as expedited because of the collection of personal identifiable information. So even though in this case the names are replaced with pseudonyms, so their real names are not collected, but you know the recordings and transcripts can be easily linked, be used to identify a certain individual. So they use the collection of audio and video data that is still considered as personal identifiable information. But yeah, I think the point about housing discrimination and potentially causing psychological discomfort that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. And so our next case study is social media data analysis. Researcher F scrapes publicly available Twitter posts about climate anxiety to analyze language use. Handles only public tweets, but collects username for potential follow-up. What do you think this case belongs to?
Well, since the information since these are public tweets, so they are publicly available, and I would consider them as kind of like secondary data. Yeah. So so I would say exempt, even though they are identifiable with the username, but then like anyone can use anything as username. So I would stick with exempt.
Okay, that's I appreciate the reasoning there. I think yeah, like username is not always like truly identifiable. Also think I would say I put expedited here only because like Twitter posts they are like think about maybe one Twitter post isn't identifiable, but if you have multiple Twitter posts, a history of a certain individual Twitter post, then like people actually disclose a lot about themselves when using social media. So, right, so when having those data collectively together, it might be used, it depends, but sometimes it can reveal what the person is. But I think, yeah, the point about username is, yeah, it doesn't always necessarily link to a certain individual. So I think it could apply to both exempt or expedited, depending on the situation.
Thank you.
So our next case study is an intervention study. Researcher G tests whether students remember material better when lectures include memes. So half the class see the standard slides, and the other half see slides with humor added. Grades are compared using existing course assessments. And so which level review do you think this one will receive?
This one is hard. They didn't say which level students. Yeah. So if they are minor students, like versus like graduate students are very different cases. But then also grades are compared using existing course assessments, meaning just the assessments themselves, or the students assessment results, and then if they are assessment results, it would be linked to the person. Yeah. So, and then so it's not quite clear. So I'm struggling with this one.
Oh yeah, it's tricky. It doesn't have like a lot of details, but yeah, I see your line of reasoning, and I think it's good that you're thinking that way. Like it depends, right? Your answer basically depends whether the student is coming from graduate level or are they minors, and also what the data they're collecting, whether it's identifiable or not.
Right.
So I think that's a good approach to think about it, and I can see like hopefully this exercise can help you to think about that way, like when you're, so that's the kind of like the few things you want to always keep in mind of when you're thinking about research, is whether your research involves some of the criterias. So for this, the answer I put in here is just going to be exempt, assuming that the students are not minors, they're graduate students, and no personal identifiable information is collected. And in this case, I'm just going on the basis that the two different interventions, including memes, should cause no more than minimal harm. So based on that principle and no personal identifying information, it will likely be exempt research. But it's a great point that, you know, it very much depends on the population and the method you're using. So, so that is all for the 7 case studies I have kind of prepared, and we have about 15 minutes left, and I kind of want to use the last 15 minutes to as a Q&A section, but also I have prepared some frequently asked questions. So this is from my personal experience. I have asked those questions myself. And also I hear people, my peers, my colleagues, sometimes they're also confused about some of the questions. So I thought it might be useful for us to kind of go over each question and answers. And at the very end, if you have some questions you want to ask for yourself, you can post it. And I will answer them at the very end. So the first question is, do I need IRB approval if my project is just a class assignment? So I hear this a lot from, you know, taking a lot of classes, and people often they're in an assignment and they're just wondering, do I need IRB for that? And so the answer is depends. If the class assignment is strictly used for learning purposes and is not intended to contribute generalizable knowledge, for example, you're not thinking about publishing it or presenting it publicly, then it likely does not require IRB approval. But if you think that you might use the data later for a thesis, for a conference, publication, it's safest to get IRB approval upfront, because once you have conducted your research, there's no going back to and get IRB afterwards. The next question is, how long does IRB usually take? The answer again is that it depends. Usually exempt research will take the shortest amount of time, while a full board review will take the longest amount of time. And the thing to note about a full board review is that what IRB office will do is that they will meet regularly throughout the year to discuss any full board reviews. So if you submit your application before kind of when they meet, you may get it faster. But let's say if you submit your application and it's still another month before they meet again, then it might take a lot longer to get a full board review approval. But also timelines also varies by institution. For example, I think graduate school usually tends to be quicker than undergraduate school. And also timeline varies by the completeness of your application. Sloppy or unclear submissions could take longer because IRB could ask you to fill in some of the information or to resubmit your application. So being clear on your method is always the best strategy to get a faster approval. The next question is, can I start recruiting participants before my IRB is approved? The answer is always no. So you can plan, design, and even pilot tests without collecting real data, but you may not interact with participants or collect identifiable data until you have official approval. And doing so can violate institutional policy and invalidate your own research. So the key point here is submitting IRB doesn't mean like getting it approved. So you have to wait until the IRB is approved for that green light, and before you can start interacting with real participants. The next question is, what counts as identifiable information? So this often is a tricky question. And so identifiable information is any data that could reasonably be linked to a person. Names, emails, student IDs, even combinations like age plus major plus small program size could be identifiable. Sometimes even if you remove the names, if someone could guess who it is from context, it's still considered as identifiable. So for example, if you're collecting data in a small, like 20-ish person company, then sometimes the age alone could be identifiable, could be linked to a certain individual. So I think the takeaway here is identifiable information is not always the same for every research and for every data set. While some names could, some information could be identifiable to some data set, it may not for the other. So when you're evaluating this piece, you always have to anticipate in your data set what's your sample and what could be considered as identifiable information in your own data set. Next question, this also happens a lot, is what if I make small changes after my study starts? Because sometimes people after they get IRB approval, it happens that they realize they have a type errors. There's some small twist they want to change to their study design. But you must submit an amendment to the IRB before implementing changes. Even small ones like adjusting survey wordings, recruitment method, or consent language. And an approved change can invalidate your approval and your own data. So always make sure that any changes you make after your study starts get notified to the IRB. Next question is, do oral or verbal consent count? And the answer is yes, especially for low-risk studies or populations where written consent might feel intimidating. I realize a lot survey studies, they just use electronic consents. But now, well, if you're working with some population where that might be difficult to get electronic signature, you can absolutely use oral, verbal, or written consent form as well. You still need a script approved by the IRB and must know that verbal consent was obtained before participation. Next question is, can I share my de-identified data publicly after the study? And the answer is usually yes, but it must be part of your original consent form. So in your consent form, and they're usually under data privacy section, you may say something like your de-identified data may be used for future research. And that way it kind of allows you to share your de-identified data after the study. If the participant didn't agree to data sharing, you need a new approval for secondary use. The last question is, who decides whether my study is exempt, me or the IRB? Sometimes I feel like people are confident that their research should be exempt so that they don't need an IRB, but that's not the case. So the IRB should be the one to decide which level of review each research is. You can suggest an exempt category, but you can't self-declare. So always make sure you submit at least a short application for an official exemption determination. And speaking from my own experience, this happened to me one time where I'm fully expecting my research to be on online survey study to be exempt research. But what turns out is that after IRB looked at my application, they determined that it should be an expedited review because there is a use of intervention or interaction with the participants. So always check with IRB. It doesn't hurt to get a second eye on your own research. So that's the important takeaway. So finally, I want to share some CGU resources for when you're preparing for an IRB application. So CGU provides standard forms and templates, such as templates for consent forms, for research outlines, etc. And so what they will do is that they have pre-populated the consent form with all the necessary components, and you just kind of have to fill in the blank to replace the some places with your own research. So they already have that for you. It's very easy to use. You can find it on the CGU IRB website. There's also a step-by-step guide on using Cetera Mentor. So this is kind of the digital app that CGU IRB office use. So if you're not sure how to navigate those apps, you can follow this. There's a step-by-step guide on their website to teach you how to use this app. And finally, IRB office also requires that if you're submitting an application, if you're doing research, you have to have an active city training. So if you don't know what city training is essentially a training you have to go through. That the training will involve some of the basic principles we have talked about, as well as some questions that will make sure that you understand how to conduct ethical research. And so once you have completed that training, you receive this city certificate. That will be the kind of the necessary certificate for you to conduct any research. That certificate also expires after a few years. So sometimes you get notification from IRB office that your city training is about to expire. So you always want to make sure that you renew your city training before it expires, so that when you're submitting your IRB application, you always have an active and working city training certificate. Is there any question on this at all? If not, we can move on to the final. We'll leave the last 10 minutes for kind of to answer any questions that people have posted. So if you still have any questions, you can scan the QR code here and submit your questions now. So we got a first question: what is the test? What is the test for a project requiring IRB approval? Example: a survey of students by a professor, whether they want to make Friday class virtual, not required. Okay, so I think this relates to the like when IRB is required. So in this case, a survey of students by a professor, whether they want to make Friday class virtual. So that because the students will likely be the participant, they're living individuals. So it depends on whether the survey is intended to contribute to generalizable knowledge or not. So in this case, it's likely not required because if I don't think the professor is if a professor is not planning to use the data to contribute to generalizable knowledge, then IRB is likely not required. But yeah. So the second question, who determines the IRB level? Do I state it when applying, or do the reviewers determine that? So that is kind of the also in the frequently asked question. So you can, when you're submitting application, there will be some preset questions and you can answer them, and that will kind of help you to determine what type of review you get. So you can kind of suggest your own IRB level when you submit your application. But it always comes down to IRB office to determine which level it is after they have received your research outlines and research descriptions. How do I start the IRB process? That's a great question. So you can, I think you can go to CGU student app, and then find or you go to CGU IRB. Either of those places, you can find a link to this Citero Mentor app. So you have to click into the link, and it might require you to log in with your CGU email. But once you're in there, you can see that's the place where you can start the IRB process to start your IRB application. But I'm happy to do a demo if needed, to do demo how to navigate the Citero Mentor app as well. So last question, if I want to interview or survey faculty from 10 schools, do I need IRB approval from all 10 schools? I think, so in this case, you're serving faculty from 10 schools, but they're considered as your participants. So they're just how you recruit from those schools. But if you're the only researcher on this project, and I think it's okay if you just submit IRB to CGU, that will allow you to recruit people from other schools to participate. But I could be wrong on this. James, do you have any thought on this question?
Yeah, I was just typing in the chat. Technically, no, you'd be fine just getting review at CGU's IRB. That's what the intention of the regulations are. But some schools, whenever you're using their students, especially if you're accessing them through official means, so through their classes, through their listservs on their campuses, or if you're talking about K-12, at their school sites, some will require IRB review, even though that's not the intent of the regulations. The way you explained it is exactly what's intended by the regulations, but some schools try to use their IRB as sort of a gateway, or a gatekeeper rather, and so you just have to check. When you seek permission to access those students, they'll tend to let you know. LAUSD is a good example. They require anybody doing research with their schools to get IRB approval through they have their own IRB at LAUSD. So
okay.
So you have to get it in both places in that case. You absolutely have to get it at the school at the site where you are the investigator. So if you're doing research for your graduate work, you're an agent of CGU, and so you have to get review here.
Yeah, so yeah, that's helpful. So it kind of depends on which school and what the school specific regulation is. So it may be helpful to check with each school, yeah. Okay, so that is all for today's session. I hope that everybody has learned something useful, and thank you for all the questions and all the comments and engagement, and So I'll leave the last 4 minutes or so. If anyone has any questions, or if people would like to see a demo on navigating the CGU IRB app, I'm happy to do a quick demo on that.